The morning breeze carried the scent of the sea as Laura ran along the waterfront, feeling the cold wind against her hot skin from exertion. Her steps were rhythmic, steady, but her mind wandered between loose thoughts, worries that she didn't dare verbalize. 10 years of marriage to Hugo, 10 years of trying to be the ideal woman for him. She took a deep breath, trying to dispel the doubts. The marriage was stable, wasn't it? Hugo rarely showed affection, but always said she was the perfect wife. So why couldn't that feeling that something was wrong leave her? Her cell phone vibrated in the pocket of her sports jacket. Without slowing down, she picked it up and saw Hugo's message on the illuminated screen. "Don't worry about the gala, darling. We can stay in tonight." Laura frowned. Hugo would never turn down such an important event. He lived for these occasions, always insisting that the couple's image was crucial for business. Last month, he himself had pressured her into choosing a new dress, saying that all the investors would be there. So, why did he want to cancel now? A shiver ran down her spine. Maybe it was just work stress. Maybe he was exhausted, but what if it wasn't? Taking a deep breath, she picked up her pace. The cold wind whipped against her face, but the feeling in her chest wouldn't go away. The more she tried to ignore it, the more that nagging intuition took over her mind. When he arrived home, he was surprised to see the front door ajar. Hugo always made a point of locking it, especially when he was alone. Laura hesitated for a moment before carefully pushing the door open. The silence weighed on the room, but she felt something different in the air. A discomfort she couldn't name. She left her gym bag on the table and walked slowly up the stairs, keeping her breathing under control. Then she heard a muffled laugh. She stopped in the middle of the corridor. The sound was coming from the bedroom. "There's no need to worry, Bianca. I want everyone to see who really suits me. You've always been the perfect woman for events like this." Hugo's voice sounded clear. Laura's world froze. Her lungs forgot how to draw in air. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, but it felt like no oxygen was coming in. The ground beneath her feet became unstable, as if she were sinking into an invisible abyss. Bianca. The name of Hugo's ex-girlfriend pierced his thoughts like a blade. The same Bianca who, according to him, was just a distant memory, an unimportant, youthful mistake. Laura closed her eyes for a moment. The expected reaction would be to enter the room, confront Hugo, demand explanations. But for the first time, the pain gave way to something else, coldness. She breathed in slowly and opened her eyes. No, she would no longer be the woman who waited for crumbs. If Hugo thought he could erase her from his own history, he was about to find out how wrong he was. Laura stood motionless in the corridor, her mind spinning at high speed. Hugo's voice still echoed in her ears, each word etched like a burning scar. "I want everyone to see who really suits me." Every syllable was a fresh wound, but as much as the impact of the betrayal was suffocating, something inside her refused to budge. She straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and pushed open the bedroom door. Hugo was sitting on the edge of the bed, cell phone still in hand. His eyes widened when he saw her standing there, her silhouette outlined by the light from the corridor. "Laura?" He hastily disconnected the call and stood up. "I didn't know you'd arrived." She crossed her arms, keeping her face impassive. "Any news for me?" Hugo blinked a few times, as if trying to process the question. "What?" Laura tilted her head slightly, watching every detail of his expression. His shoulders stiffened, his hand still gripping his cell phone tightly, his jaw tense. She already knew him too well. She knew exactly when he was hiding something. "Who was that on the phone?" Hugo let out a forced laugh, looking away. "Business. You know how it is. Meetings, clients, and since when do business meetings include compliments about beauty?" The silence that followed was so heavy that it seemed to fill the entire room. Hugo ran his tongue over his lips, avoiding facing her directly. "Laura, you're exaggerating. She let out a dry, humorless laugh. Exaggerating? Because I heard my own husband say that another woman suits him better? Hugo snorted and rubbed his face with his hands, impatient. Look, I don't have time for this kind of drama. It's just an event, an important dinner. It doesn't mean anything. Laura stepped forward, forcing him to face her. And why does Bianca need to be there instead of me? Hugo finally looked directly at her. For a moment his expression softened, as if he were about to invent some comforting lie. But then he gave up. His posture changed, his face hardened. Because it's better for my image. This time, the blow was direct. No beating around the bush, no attempts to soften the truth. Laura felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. She opened her mouth to reply, but no words came out. I need everything to go well, Hugo continued, his voice taking on a calculated tone. You know what these investors are like. They want to see perfection, sophistication. She blinked, incredulous. And I'm not enough for that? Hugo didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence said more than any justification he could come up with. Laura felt the air leave her lungs, but something in her remained firm. The pain was there, burning, but there was something else. Anger. I get it. His voice came out calmer than she had expected. Hugo relaxed his shoulders, as if he believed that she had accepted the situation. Laura, I need to take a shower. She interrupted him, turning around. It was a long run. She left the room without looking back. She still didn't know exactly what she was going to do, but one thing was certain. Hugo had just made the worst mistake of his life. Laura went into the bathroom and locked the door behind her. The steam from the hot water quickly began to fill the room, but she felt neither cold nor hot. Her body was numb, and her mind was racing uncontrollably. Because it's better for my image. Hugo's phrase echoed over and over in her head. She undressed mechanically and stepped into the shower. The water ran down her skin, but it didn't wash away the indignation, the hurt, and the growing anger inside her. For 10 years, Laura had dedicated herself to her marriage. She gave up her dreams, silenced her desires, all to be the perfect wife. And in the end, all she received was contempt. She closed her eyes. It would end there. Stepping out of the shower, Laura put on a robe and tied her hair up in a messy bun. She then walked to the bedroom, but Hugo was no longer there. Better that way. She needed some space to think. She picked up her cell phone. If Hugo thought he could erase her so easily from his own history, then Laura needed to find out how long he had been trying to do so. She opened the bank app and accessed his credit card transactions. Her eyes scrolled down the list quickly, looking for something unusual. Then she found it. Boutique Maison, $12,800. Laura felt her stomach turn. She remembered a month earlier when she had seen an elegant black dress in that same boutique. When she commented to Hugo that she would love to buy it, he laughed and said, Laura, don't spend money on that. We have other priorities. Other priorities. She pressed her lips together and kept sliding her finger across the screen. Shoes, jewelry, an imported perfume. All the items had been bought recently. But what made her breath catch was the reservation at a luxury spa, booked for the weekend of the gala. So it wasn't just an event, it was a celebration. Laura felt a wave of nausea. Hugo wasn't just taking Bianca as his date. He was investing in her, dressing her from head to toe, preparing her to occupy a space that used to be hers. A bitter laugh escaped Laura's lips. It hadn't been an oversight, it wasn't a mistake. Hugo was changing Laura. The anger came like a punch. Her heart was pounding, but her mind was clear for the first time. If he wants a flawless woman so badly for tonight, that's what he'll get. Laura left the room determined. She picked up her cell phone and quickly dialed the only number that could help her. The call was answered on the third ring. Helena, "It's me, Laura. I need your help." Laura parked the car in front of Helena's small house. The porch lights were on, and the familiar scent of lavender mixed with the perfume of freshly sewn fabric floated in the air. She got out of the car and took a deep breath before knocking on the door. Within seconds, the handle turned and Helena appeared with a warm smile. "Laura, it's been so long!" The woman pulled her into a warm hug. Laura felt her eyes sting, but she didn't cry. Not anymore. "I need your help, Helena," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Helena tilted her head, analyzing her with her experienced gaze. "Come in, darling. Tell me everything." Laura walked through the door and was immediately enveloped by the coziness of Helena's small studio. Spools of thread were spread out on the wooden table, and a burgundy dress was being finished on the mannequin. "So, tell me what brought you here?" Helena asked, crossing her arms. Laura slid her fingers along a roll of black satin and took a deep breath. "I want a dress." "A perfect dress." Helena arched an eyebrow. "For the gala? I thought you didn't go to this kind of event anymore." "Neither did I, but now I'm going." Helena narrowed her eyes. "Does this have something to do with Hugo?" Laura nodded. "He thinks he can replace me. He thinks I'm dead weight in his life. And you know what? I'm going to show him that he can't discard me as if I were invisible." Helena smiled approvingly. Now I recognized the Laura I knew years ago. She pulled out a sketch pad and picked up a pencil. "Let's create something unforgettable." Laura sat next to Helena, watching her draw precise lines on the paper. "I want an impeccable cut. Something that looks tailor-made for a queen," said Laura, feeling her confidence grow with each stroke. Helena smiled. "Then that's exactly what you'll get." The evening lengthened as the two worked together. The fabric was chosen, the measurements were taken, and every detail of the dress began to take shape. At the end of the night, Laura ran her fingers along the black satin. "It's perfect," she murmured. Helena touched her shoulder. "You're ready to shine, Laura." And for the first time in a long time, Laura believed it. The ballroom of the Imperial Hotel sparkled under the golden light of the crystal chandeliers. Elegantly dressed men and women circulated around the space, their voices blending with the soft sound of the orchestra. It was an atmosphere of refinement and exclusivity, and it was exactly where Hugo wanted to be. Hugo entered the hall with Bianca by his side. She was wearing a tight red dress, tailored to attract attention, and it worked. Some of the guests murmured discreetly, admiring her presence. "They're all watching," whispered Bianca, pleased. Hugo smiled, pleased with himself. "I told you tonight would be perfect." But then something changed in the air. A growing buzz began to spread around the room. Hugo frowned. Bianca looked around, confused. Then he saw her. Laura entered the salon with firm steps and her head held high. Her impeccably cut black dress hugged her curves with millimeter precision. The satin fabric flowed with her every move, reflecting the light from the lamps like a whispered secret. But it wasn't just the dress. It was her presence. She didn't look like a betrayed wife. She didn't look like a humiliated wife. She looked like a queen, and to make matters worse, she wasn't alone. A man accompanied her, tall, elegant, with a confident expression. He offered his arm, and Laura took it naturally. Hugo felt his stomach turn. "What is she doing here?" Bianca hissed. Laura stopped at the entrance to the hall and smiled slightly when she saw Hugo stare. Then she whispered something to her companion before walking towards them. When she stopped in front of Hugo and Bianca, silence fell between the three of them. "Good evening, Hugo." His name on her lips sounded like a challenge. It took him a second to recover his voice. "Laura, what are you doing here?" She tilted her head slightly, looking Bianca up and down before turning to face him. "Enjoying my husband's evening. After all, what kind of wife would I be if I didn't?" The blow was direct. Hugo felt the surrounding gazes turn to them, and for a moment all he could do was swallow. Laura smiled. The evening had only just begun. Hugo felt the air around him become heavy. The curious looks, the discreet whispers. Everyone was waiting for his reaction, but for some reason he felt unable to speak. Laura, on the other hand, seemed perfectly at ease. She looked around and sighed, as if assessing her surroundings. Then she turned back to Hugo with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything," she said, slightly adjusting the satin glove that covered her arms. "Laura, this is a surprise," muttered Hugo, trying to regain his composure. Bianca crossed her arms. "We weren't told you were coming." Laura arched an eyebrow. "Oh, I thought so, but I thought it would be inappropriate to miss the chance to honor my own husband's evening." Hugo took a deep breath, forcing himself to look in control. "Can we talk in private? Now?" Laura looked around as if genuinely surprised by the request. "But we're surrounded by such interesting people." Her casual tone only irritated him even more. Bianca touched Hugo's arm. "I don't think that's necessary. There's nothing to discuss." Laura let out a low laugh. "Oh, Bianca. You've always had this unshakable confidence, haven't you?" Hugo saw Bianca fidget uncomfortably when she heard Laura's amused tone. He knew it wasn't a good sign. Before he could interrupt, a new voice rang out. "I hope I'm not in the way." Everyone turned to see a man with grey hair and a keen eye. He wore a perfectly tailored suit and held a glass of champagne with casual elegance. Hugo immediately recognized him. Victor, one of the biggest investors in the fashion industry, and a distinguished presence that evening. "Mr. Victor," said Hugo, forcing a smile, "it's an honor to have you here." Victor gestured with his hand, dispensing with formality. "The honor is mine, but I must say my curiosity has been aroused." He turned to Laura. "Who is this woman with such a striking presence?" Laura smiled. "My name is Laura. Laura Castellanos." "Castellanos?" Victor looked at Hugo with an amused glint in his eyes. "Your wife." Hugo's silence was his worst answer. Laura nodded, keeping her eyes fixed on her husband. "Yes. Officially, I am." Victor sipped his champagne thoughtfully. "That's interesting. I'd like to talk to you later, Laura. I feel there's something very promising about you." Hugo felt a knot tighten in his throat. He was losing control of the situation, and Laura knew it. Laura felt the weight of the stares around her. All the attention was on her, and, for the first time, she didn't feel like Hugo's shadow. On the contrary, it was he who seemed out of place that night. Victor smiled perceptively. "Tell me, Laura, what is your line of work?" She held his gaze firmly. "Fashion." Victor arched an eyebrow, intrigued. "That's interesting. Are you a fashion designer?" Laura slid her fingers over the side of her impeccable dress. "I designed this." The reaction was immediate. A few people nearby, who had only been listening to the conversation, leaned over to look at the details of the dress. Victor stepped forward, appraising with critical eyes. "The cut is exceptional. The choice of fabric, too, and the way it molds to the body." He snapped his fingers. "This is not the work of an amateur." Hugo let out a dry laugh. "Laura only sews as a hobby, nothing more." Victor ignored Hugo completely. "Have you ever thought about launching your own line?" Laura's heart leapt. "I've never had the chance." Victor twirled his cup between his fingers. "Then consider this your chance. I want you to come to Paris. I have an established brand, but I need new creative minds. If what I see now is just a sample of your talent, then you're exactly what I'm looking for." The proposal hit the salon like a bombshell. Bianca's eyes widened. Hugo's expression hardened. Laura, however, remained composed. "Paris, Mr. Victor? That's not an invitation you give to just anyone." "That's right," he smiled. "And that's why I'm asking you." Hugo intervened, his voice filled with incredulity. "Victor, this is absurd. You hardly know Laura." Victor finally looked at him. "Hugo, do you realize what you're saying? Your wife has a rare talent and, as far as I can tell, you've never noticed it." Hugo clenched his jaw. Laura seized the opportunity. "I accept." Hugo turned to her, shocked. "What?" "I accept the offer." Hugo clenched his fists. "You can't do that." Laura stepped forward, reducing the distance between them. "You always said you needed someone impeccable by your side. I think we've finally found a solution." She then turned to Victor and held out her hand. "When are we leaving?" Victor smiled and shook her hand. "As soon as you're ready." Hugo stood there watching his world fall apart. Laura was leaving, and this time it was he who would be left behind. Paris airport was packed, but Laura moved among the people with absolute calm. The sound of announcements echoed through the lobby, and the scent of coffee mingled with the sophisticated perfume of people hurrying past. She held her passport tightly. The name printed on it now reflected her new reality, Laura Montenegro. Hugo's surname was in the past, as was everything it stood for. Raphael walked beside her, carrying a small suitcase. "Nervous?" he asked with a smile in his corner. Laura looked at him and smiled. Not for the first time in a long time. The last few months had been a storm. Her divorce from Hugo had been quick and unrewarding. He tried to reconcile, claiming he was sorry, but Laura didn't fall for his tricks. Bianca, for her part, was quick to show her true face. As soon as she realized that Hugo was no longer the prestigious figure she had imagined, she abandoned him. And without her presence to reinforce his image, Hugo saw his reputation crumble. Laura, on the other hand, flourished. Since arriving in Paris, she worked tirelessly alongside Victor, learning and perfecting her craft. Her first fashion show was an absolute success, and her personal brand began to establish itself as a benchmark for sophistication and elegance. Now, looking to the future, she knew she had won. Raphael touched her arm gently. "It's time." Laura took a deep breath and walked with him to the boarding gate. As she crossed the brightly lit corridor, she noticed something curious. There was no more fear. There was no more pain. Only the certainty that this time destiny belonged to her. A year later, the Paris sky was tinged with gold as Laura walked through the Luxembourg Gardens. The cool wind ruffled her hair, but she didn't mind. The feeling was invigorating. Raphael walked beside her, pushing a baby carriage. Inside it, a small miracle. Her triplets were sleeping peacefully, wrapped in soft blankets. Laura stopped for a moment, watching them tenderly. "They have your eyes," Raphael murmured. She smiled, entwining her fingers with his. "And my strength." Looking back, it seemed surreal to think that she had once felt insignificant, that she believed she was less than she deserved. Now Hugo was just a distant name in her memory. He had lost everything: money, status, respect. And above all, he had lost the only woman who had ever really loved him. But Laura felt no resentment. She only felt peace. Raphael gently pulled her into a lingering kiss. "Ready for the next parade?" Laura laughed. Always. With one last look at her children, she knew without a doubt that her life had never been so complete. The past was behind her, and the future had never been brighter.